Welcome to Opening Bid. I'm Yahoo Finance Executive Editor Brian Sozzi. Now let's make some money and hopefully get a hell of a lot smarter. Joining me now is Tusk Ventures founder and CEO Bradley Tusk. Bradley, good to see you.
Yeah,
it has been
on,
a long time. You're an early supporter of Yahoo Finance.
Invite me back on.
Yeah, well, I mean, you are now officially
thrilled to be here.
You're officially in the Opening Bid family. We have a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
But I was reading recently that did you open a bookstore?
I did. So if anyone watching this wants to find a great way to lose money, I have figured that out.
Bookstore.
Bookstore. Now, I knew that was going to happen.
I mean, Amazon, Bezos, books.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Always loved books. I've written a couple of them and thought like one day it'd be fun to own a bookstore in that sort of like Sleepless in Seattle, Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan movie kind of way. And then when COVID really walloped New York, I had this thought of like, look, if you're going to do something nice for the city from a retail perspective, now's the time to do it. Like I knew I was going to lose money on this thing. And so we found a space on the Lower East Side, and it is a indie bookstore, a podcast studio that's actually free for anyone to use. So you just go to ptnetwear.com and you can sign up. An event space. We have authors almost every night in a cafe. And it has a funny name. So the store is called P&T Knitwear. And the reason why is when my family came to this country in the 1950s, so after World War II, they were living in the displaced persons camp in Germany, and they finally got a cousin to sponsor them to come to the U.S. And my grandfather and a guy he knew from the DP camps opened up a 300 square foot sweater store on the Lower East Side called P&T Knitwear. So when I signed the lease for this place, we're Orchard between Houston and Stanton, I texted my dad and said, where was that original store? And he said, oh, it was on Allen Street, which was the next block over. And I said, cool, remind me of the name. And he wrote, P&T Knitwear, but you can't name a bookstore P&T Knitwear. So as soon as my dad told me I couldn't name a P&T Knitwear, that was the name.
That's got to be cool. I mean, to have an entire business career and you're able to open that almost a homage to your family and their story, right?
Yeah, but we found a photo of the original P&T Knitwear. So one of the interior walls of our store is just a giant blown up photo of the original. So yeah, obviously my grandfather hasn't been alive for a while now, but yeah, it was cool to be able to do that, and I think it was meaningful to my dad. And look, we're having a really fun time doing it. Obviously, it is not the best way to make money, but for as long as venture capital keeps the lights on, I'll be fine.
So talk to us. Your career, it touches. You're just an interesting cat, Brad. And I've told you that many times. But let's start on like your political line. Of course, we worked on the Bloomberg campaign.
Yeah,
and with Chuck Schumer.
Yeah, a couple things. I would say the highlights or lowlights, depending how you want to look at it, would be I was Michael Bloomberg's campaign manager, ran for mayor. Also worked for him at City Hall. I was the deputy governor of Illinois for 4 years, so I ran the state's budget operations, legislation, policy, and communications, and worked for a sociopath named Rod Blagojevich, who ended up in jail. I did have to testify against
what is that
him
guy
at his trial. I stayed as far away from him. The last time I saw him was in the courtroom. And then, as you said, I was Chuck Schumer's communications director for a couple of years in the Senate. And then my pivot into venture and tech was ran the campaigns to legalize Uber and ride sharing around the U.S. And that worked. And that kind of introduced me to startups and tech. And that's how I got into all this.
If you were advising the president, what would you tell him?
I would tell him to step down, or he doesn't have to withdraw. Actually, the best thing he could do if he said to me, it's really important that if it's not me, it be Harris, then you should actually resign and let her be president and have that peak and purview. Assuming he doesn't really care about that, the next best thing would be for him to withdraw from the race. He can endorse her, or he can say, we're going to have an open convention. Either way, he doesn't have the power to pick the successor either way. And like, to me, the one caveat or carrot you could offer him is like, look, now you can pardon Hunter. So if because the odds of him now winning this election feel very, very low. But if he either withdraws or if he runs and loses, but if he runs and loses, his reputation will be so destroyed. But if he withdraws and he says, look, the thing that I need to get out of this is I at least take care of my son, who I believe was convicted and prosecuted unfairly, I think people could at least understand that. So that would at least be the sort of the incentive that you could give him. But look, I do think that he has really misplayed this, whereas if a year ago he said, I set out to be a transitional president, and I was. I served in Barack Obama's government as vice president for 8 years. I beat Donald Trump. I helped us recover from COVID. I accomplished A, B, and C as president. And I'm now going to step aside to allow the younger generation to take their place. I think he would have gone down in history as a really good president. Maybe not beloved because he's not that kind of charismatic figure, but respected.
Well, if he hangs on, If he hangs on and goes to the end
And wins?
and loses,
Yeah.
how is he remembered?
Solely as the guy who was too selfish to recognize that he was too old to be president and lost to Trump, and that will be it. So he has managed to effectively destroy his legacy. If he were at this point to step aside and his replacement won, I think it would be salvaged. Although, to be clear, the thing that people know him for, if you stopped 1,000 people on the street right now and said, tell me one thing about Joe Biden, old would be like 90% of the answers. So he's already done a lot of damage, but at this point, it would have to be to have his successor actually win and whatever he can do to help them win.
He's had there's been, looks like another shift in strategy. He's come out very strong against some of his media people that he liked. Of course, he did that radio or that call-in with Morning Joe. You've worked up close with very powerful politicians.
Yeah.
What is making someone like President Biden tick that he's holding on to this view?
Yeah, and I wrote a whole book about this. One's called The Fixer, that basically has a thesis that every politician, and there are a handful of exceptions, Bloomberg happened to be one, but it's really a handful, is a desperately insecure, self-loathing person that can't live out the validation of holding office. They have a hole in their psyche, and the only thing that fills that hole is being somebody, and to them that means being elected and being in office. And no single policy issue matters more to them than keeping that hole filled, right? If that were not the case, we wouldn't have school shootings, right? There's so many terrible things that we could clearly prevent or at least improve with better governance and legislation, but it would require people to probably sacrifice their political career, and they're never willing to do so. Or let me give you, since we're on a financial show here, a good economic example. So if you remember, in 2019, Amazon wanted to put their second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens.
So that bookstore owner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that other guy. Yeah. And turnout in that state Senate primary, Mike Generis is the state senator for that part of Queens. Turnout in his last primary was about 10%. And when AOC came out against the Amazon deal, although her position really made no sense substantively, Generis had to make a choice, which was he understood that the very few people, the 15,000 or so that actually bothered to vote in a primary, were very left-wing, and that if he supported the deal and pushed it through, he probably would have a serious left-wing challenger. So he had a choice. Keep one job, his own, or create 40,000 new jobs, and he picked his own. And he got easily reelected, but at the expense of a lot of jobs that we could have used. They're always going to pick themselves. And so you have to change underlying input. So one of the things that I've been working on now for the last 7 years is this thing called the Mobile Voting Project, where I've been funding the development of technology and elections. People can actually vote on their phones, because my view is the reason why turnout is so low is people just aren't going to not take their kid to school on a Tuesday to vote in a state Senate primary or a city council primary. Here in New York City, where you and I are sitting, city council primary turnout last year was 6.5%, right? You could literally win a city council seat in the most important city in the world with like 7,000 votes. And so if you want them to be more centrist, you can't allow the primaries to be controlled by extremists. When turnout is 7%, 10%, 12%, who are those voters? The furthest left or the furthest right? So you either get the total dysfunction of Washington, or you get totally one-sided government, whether it's the state of Texas on the right or the city of San Francisco or New York on the left. But if turnout in that state Senate primary in Long Island City were 27% instead of 9%, just based on the polling of the district, he would have had to have been for it, and those jobs would have been created today. If you are a Republican congressman, and I'm an independent at this point, so I don't like either party, but the reason you don't vote for laws that would restrict access to assault weapons is because when your primary turnout is 12% and half of those are NRA members, you are effectively sacrificing your next race. But if turnout in your primary were 32%, just based on the polling of Republicans around these issues, you would be for sensible restrictions. And so every policy output is the result of a political input. And if we want a government that is centrist and can work together and compromise and get things done, we've got to radically increase primary turnout. And the only way to do that is by letting people vote on their phones.
Staying on this topic, a couple weeks before the president's debate debacle, former Mayor Bloomberg, gave $20 million to the campaign?
To Biden, yeah.
One, have you talked to him? And then two, what happens to donors like former Mayor Bloomberg the deep pockets, do you think they will stick with Biden, or it's done?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, you saw Howard Wolfson, who is Mike's top political advisor, quoted in the Times, I think last week, basically saying that Biden should drop out. And so, when Howard says that publicly on the front page of the New York Times, that's not by accident. Now, look, for Mike, $20 million is not that. Like yesterday, he announced $1 billion gift to Johns Hopkins Medical School so that no student there ever will have to pay tuition again.
So $20 million is like my $5.
It's kind of a drop in the bucket for him. But the real question becomes, if Biden stays, it's hard to argue if you're Biden to call Bloomberg and say, give me more money, right? I've had members of Congress and other elected officials since the debate call me for money like people do every day. And I've just said, look, if you come out and say that Biden should withdraw, I'm happy to support you. But if you don't have the guts to just do something as simple as that, where 80% of the public is already there, I'm not going to give you money. Like one congressman said to me, well, you have to give me money because we House Democrats are more important than ever because the president's so weak. He's so weak because you don't say anything, right? But let's say that it is Kamala or Gretchen Whitmer or Gavin Newsom or Josh Shapiro or whoever it might be, then all of a sudden money becomes very important. And while I haven't talked to Mike about this, if you saw Mike drop multiples of $20 million to help beat Trump for someone else, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
All right, hang with us, Brad. Yeah. We're going to go for a quick break. We'll be right back. Bradley, are you surprised, you're in that VC community, of course, are you surprised that a lot of VCs have now tossed their support to former President Trump?
No. I think that if you're a VC, and this is very specific to VCs, but the VC market has been terrible for the last 4 years. So ironically, the overall U.S. economy and the stock market have been very good, with the one notable exception of inflation, obviously. But there's basically been no M&A, which you could arguably blame on Biden's FTC and their policies, and really very, very few successful tech IPOs in the last 4 years. And so whether or not it's Biden's fault, and I don't think it is, a lot of VCs would say, hey, I made a lot of money 8 years ago, and I've made no money in the last 4 years. I want a president that's better for me. So I'm not surprised by that. So if you combine that with them saying to themselves, look, Trump, they all would acknowledge, at least privately, that Trump is highly problematic in many ways, but they would say, so is Biden, and at least under Trump, I was making money, right? And overall, I do think Biden has been a good president, but you can point to some policies that he has adopted that you could say have been an hindrance to liquidity in the venture market, most notably some of the FTC's positions, of which, to be clear, I've actually been pretty publicly supportive of Lina Khan and her efforts to break up some of the big tech companies like that bookstore owner that you mentioned before, because I do think that they have monopolistic power. But the reason why I support it is, as an early stage tech investor, so we invest in seed and Series A deals, I actually can invest in a potential competitor to Meta or Apple or Microsoft or Amazon or Google, because they have so much monopolistic power that they'll just crush them, right? And I think that we are actually really mitigating and dispelling innovation in a bunch of different markets by allowing these companies to be so powerful. But overall, I think the FTC and DOJ have been so aggressive that the message that has been sent to the market is your merger is going to have a hard time getting through, and that has put a real damper on the whole thing.
Well, then you're in the trenches with these early stage companies. Are you excited about the prospects of a Trump presidency?
No, because first and foremost, I'm a human being. Second of all, I have kids. Third of all, I'm a New Yorker, and he certainly kind of hates New York. It's now the state that both where he was convicted criminally and had that giant multi-$100 million settlement or ruling against him. So no, I'm not. Now, if you said to me, could I see the venture market opening up and liquidity happening upon a Trump election? Yeah, maybe, because I think everyone's waiting for something to break the dam, right? And I think the thought for the last 2 years has been, well, when interest rates come down, meaningfully, that's what'll do it. But I think that Powell has been very clear that until he feels like inflation is further lowered, he's not going to do that. And so I don't think we can really count on that. There were, you may remember, about a little less than a year ago, a bunch of IPOs last September. It was like Instacart and ARM and a few others. And we thought, okay, maybe this will be the thing. Hasn't, right. So is it possible that a change in administration, even if it's not inherently better, could break things loose? maybe. But with that said, look, I have to live in the world, and I would rather live in a country that is fair and free and safe and democratic, and have a little less liquidity.
Are you excited about a potential vice president run if she gets the call?
I think that she is not the strongest of the options. I think that the best thing both for her, in a way, for her ability to actually win the general election and for the Democratic Party is to have some version of a mini open primary and convention. One of the things that I think the American public is very upset about right now is they feel very lied to, that the Biden world and the people that rule the Democratic Party, and in many ways the media, the mainstream media as well. I sound like a Trumper here, but I don't think it's entirely.
You made it clear, and you're not Trumper.
I'm not,
okay.
but I do think that behind the scenes, a handful of people have really controlled access to information so tightly that the American people have been lied to. And so I think they're not interested in having it rigged again to be like, this is now who you have to be for. So I think you've got 5 to 10 candidates who are credible and legitimate. Put them all out there. And look, imagine, so like you and I aren't even old enough to remember a contested convention where the actual nominee was
I've never
chosen.
seen it.
Right, me either.
I wasn't even a thought.
Right. So we've only ever seen these sort of, like hackneyed speeches and made for television stuff that no one pays attention to. Imagine if they literally were going to decide it. We all would be totally riveted. And I would argue, and I've been saying this even for a long time now, that if you did have someone come out at the convention, America loves a winner, right? And if someone a phoenix rises from the ashes and they win and they're sort of the opposite of Biden, obviously, I think that one, it's going to be a lot more competitive than it is right now. And two, the fact that Donald Trump, who has no discipline whatsoever, has managed to keep his mouth totally shut since the debate, is a pretty good indication that the one thing he wants more than anything is for Joe Biden to stay in the race, right? And so the last thing that he wants is Gretchen Whitmer or someone like that emerging as this fresh-faced alternative, because then the focal point goes back to Trump, right? What you want is sort of a cipher of someone that is effectively so unknown that it's not about them anymore. The reason why Biden won in 20, it's not that there's this deep love for Joe Biden in this country. It's just that the race was about Trump, and people said, we don't like this guy. We don't want this guy. So that's what you'd want to recreate.
August 8th, Elon Musk, robotaxi day.
Yep.
You're an early investor in Uber.
Yep.
Does Elon crush Uber?
So it's interesting. So a couple things. I knew that we were going to talk about this because it was in my briefing, and so I've been thinking about it all day.
Are you still working with Travis? Are you still talking?
Yeah, yes, I do. In fact, we have a call at 1:15 today.
Okay, we got to get you out of here. But okay, fair enough.
But although he has no interest in this anymore, so he does. It's on his ghost kitchen stuff that we do. But yes, look. Elon is really, and by the way, I own a consulting firm where Elon's been a client. Right? So I've worked with Elon, and he's really confusing because on one hand, he just says things for the sake of saying things and getting attention and all of that. He is better at sort of motivating retail investors than anyone I've ever seen, basically. But at the same time, like half the stuff he says comes true. And the problem is you don't know which half it's going to be. And the stuff that does come true is still pretty remarkable, right? So you can't bet against
rockets,
him. Rockets, satellites, the Neuralink now.
Chips in people's heads.
Right. It's amazing. But at the same time, you never know. So I know he's got on August 8th this big robotaxi announcement. Who knows, right?
Do you think he even has a robo-taxi?
Maybe not.
Or is this just like pictures on an
look,
deck?
I mean, I used so a few things. One is I used to drive a Tesla. It had autopilot that was pretty good. Now it's had some issues, but overall, could it just be a much more enhanced version of that? Sure. Second, speaking of Phoenix, last Christmas I was in Phoenix and I made a point of riding in the Waymo driverless taxis. It was so cool. Have you done it?
I've driven in one. It's a little weird. I see where you're going. It's just, I need to see a human.
The thing that blew me away the most, and Phoenix is perfect because it's actually sort of wide, and was we made a left onto another road, and you could see there was a red light, but it was like far away in the distance, right? And about halfway through, we actually speed up, and I'm like, why are we speeding up to a red light? But because the car knew that the light was about to turn green. Mm-hmm. And based on that, it went faster, right? So it was kind of amazing. So do I think that he might have a product that is as good as a Waymo taxi or a cruise taxi? Potentially.
But is it niche? I think Uber's proven at this point. I mean, they've pretty much demolished Lyft. Full stop.
Yes.
Isn't this just Uber's mark? And it's going to take a decade for Tesla to make an inroad.
Well, it depends on how you look at it, right? So Uber is not any longer developing their own autonomous. For a long time, they were developing their own autonomous technology. Look, what you lost when Travis, and I'm a Travis partisan, so I'm not objective, but what you lost when Travis stopped being CEO was this person with this incredible vision that could say, here's how we're going to tie together autonomous and flying cars and freight and ride sharing and all of the food and all of these different things, whereas Uber right now is much more compartmentalized. They do food delivery, they do ride sharing. So yeah, they're going to be the go-to for, I think, who customers go to for the product. But keep in mind, Uber is still only like a 15-year-old company, right? And Tesla does have.
Feels like they've been around forever.
I know, but it was 2008, 2009, right? So Tesla has the same kind of different market, but the same kind of name recognition as Uber. Elon certainly is more than Dara or anyone that runs Uber. So either whether they partner up or, I wouldn't bet against Elon of this thing, but I also would be surprised if what he rolled out on August 8th is meaningfully different than what Waymo already
is. Travis working with Elon? There's been some scuttlebutt on
X. I saw that. I'm going to ask him when we talk.
Okay.
But I know that they talk sometimes just because he's just casually mentioned that to me, but I don't know if there's any actual partnership happening.
The last about minute and a half, Brad, we try to leave people inspired on what they can do in their business career. What have you learned from your biggest investing mistakes? What have been your takeaways?
Yeah, it's funny because when I turned 50 this year, and
50?
And I wrote an essay about what I learned. So I have a Substack, and it's on there. You can find it. It's basically 50 lessons that I've learned at 50. I'll throw out a few on the business career and investing. The first one is, and this is true both for business and life, everyone's making it up as they go along, right? So we all think like this person, and then when you because I've been able to work with sort of the top people in politics and business and tech, they're smart, but they're still making it up as they go along. Nobody really knows anything. So that's number one. Number two, life goes up and down. In some ways, early stage tech investing is sort of the perfect metaphor for that, because by definition, we assume that a third of our investments are going to go to zero and another third are going to be middling. And then we need a couple of Grand Slam home runs, and we've been lucky to often have that. But that's what really drives the returns for the fund. And so and that's true for every facet of life. No relationship is always great or always terrible. And you've got to, I teach at Columbia, and the last day of every semester, I throw away all the course materials and I say to the kids, it's the business school, all right, we have 3 hours. You ask me any question you want about business or life, and I will give you a candid, honest answer. And it turns out that the two things actually merge completely, right? Because ultimately, and stop me if I'm getting too philosophical here, but
no, let it roll.
We're all solving for the same ultimate thing, which is underlying happiness, right? Maybe there's an afterlife, maybe there's reincarnation, we don't know, right? But we know that we're here for X amount of time, and the happier we are, the better off we are. And what I've learned is, happiness really is sort of a sustained feeling of peace and contentment with the kind of human being that I am. And so in a lot of ways, if you are doing things in your career and your life that give you some sense of purpose and meaning and are intellectually meaningful and interesting to you, and you are working with people that you like and care about, and you have relationships in your life, people that really matter to you, you're going to be happy. All happiness science says that. And if you are wildly successful, but no one can stand you, and all you want to do is stomp on everyone all day, you're going to be miserable.
Seeing you made me happy. Bradley Tusk, it's been a while. Tusk Ventures founder and CEO. Good to see you.
Thanks for
always making time for Yahoo Finance. We appreciate
of course.
it. Good luck with the bookstore.
Thank you.
All right. That's it for the latest episode of Opening Bid.